I'm going to be talking about module.js. Don't give Ross a hard time. I just told him I think an hour ago what I was going to be talking about. So those question marks, that was my bad in the original slide. But yeah, module.js is what powers require and the entire Node module loading system. So it's a super powerful core module, and most people don't know about it. It's doing a heck of a lot of stuff. And so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. I'm working at Box, working on Node.js there, and I'm also writing at fredkschlott.com. And I've been writing about a lot of kind of design stuff, internal stuff, just kind of anything I can kind of dig into. And one of the coolest things was kind of looking to see what module loading actually did. So almost everyone's familiar with a line like this, where you define your public interface, but what does that actually mean? Why exports, and why even module for that matter? Where does that even come from? And in the same vein, what is required to do? Where does that come from? I think most people know module, require, maybe exports. There's actually 6 different things that are provided. And so I'm going to kind of go into what those are, how they end up there, and what's really going on under the hood. Module.js is a really cool module. It's probably my favorite one. Not that I have favorites, but it's a really cool module because it's a really good way to get into core. I know before I'd done this, I'd never even looked really at anything in core. But it's a great kind of jumping in point, because everything kind of feels familiar. People are familiar with how loading works. And so exploring the code base, it kind of branches out into other core modules. So if you're ever interested in looking at core, I definitely recommend it as a starting point for that. So the rest of this is going to be a whole environment setup. Not there, it's just right there. So the rest of this is going to be kind of just a code walkthrough. Please shout stuff out. If I run over something or miss something or talk too fast, please let me know. It's hopefully going to be a little bit, what's the word? Shared experience. Let's go with that. So I have Node open here, and we're going to open lib, and we're going to find module.js. And so this is a core module, and to save us all the headache, we're going to call it the base module. The module is going to get really old really quick. So we have here the base module, and you can see it defined right here, module, and module.exports module. So what this file does is 2 things. For one, it kind of builds the representation of how Node sees a module. So the way the Node manages the cache and all that, it uses this representation of an instance of a module, the base module. The class itself is also in charge of loading, so it handles all the loading of modules, compiling, executing, and that cache itself. So let's just play along in a little sandbox here. Can everyone read this, by the way? Is this big enough?
Command plus.
And make it a little bit bigger?
Yeah, a little bit.
How about that? Still bigger? You can go.
That's
How
that's
about that? I think that's good. Let me know if you can't see as we go forward. So, pretty familiar line here. Let's include the express module. What this actually does, to kind of give us a starting point in the module, the base module, is synonymous with this. So we have our module. So module actually provides all the work that require function does. That's really just a shortcut to calling this. And so this is where we'll start. It's a method on the module instance, and it doesn't really do too much on its own, and it ends up deferring a lot of the work to module.load. This is a shared function that your whole application uses. And what this does, I'm just going to jump through it. I'll skip over the non-important stuff. It does a little setup, gets your file name. First thing it does is it checks the cache. So Node keeps the cache of every module you've ever loaded in its lifetime. And it's that one instance that it loads and shares across the application. So first thing it does it exist in the cache? If it does, great, we return exports. So you'll start to see why we use exports and why that's important. It's because right here and in a few other places, that's what the base module decides to expose. That could be .foobar, that could be whatever, but Node shows exports. But this is our first time including requests, or express. Some syntax filing and comment that out. So it doesn't exist in the cache. Let's keep going. I'm going to skip over how it loads native modules. It's really similar except for a ton of really special weird cases, so you get all the same knowledge out of just following along. Native modules, they'll jump out and do their own thing, very similar, so let's keep going. We're loading Express, it's not native, we create a new module. If you remember above, it really just sets a few properties, not too much. Do a few checks here, add a few more properties. We save it to the cache. Nothing's happened, we haven't loaded the file or anything, we're just making a nice place for it in the cache, just in case. And then here, we start the loading. So we tell the module to load itself based on this file name. Let's jump into that. So load, really all it does is, again, asserts a few things. There's a lot of these kind of setup functions. Gives you a nice file name, some paths, and then these extensions are what actually do the compilation. So a JavaScript file, you need to define module.exports equals, but in a JSON file, you just give it a JSON blob and you save it. And so how does that get translated into the module loading system? Well, we have these extensions, which are compilers. So let's find some. We have module.extensions JavaScript and JSON, and then for a node executable. And this is what load basically does. It basically fires off one of these to, let's take JSON for example, reads in the JSON, tries to parse it, and if it works out, we get module.exports equals that JSON. But let's do something a little more complicated. Let's do an actual module, a JavaScript file. This is going to read the file just like with JSON, and it's going to fire off compile. If you think of the load function I showed you previously, the one that managed the cache, managed the actual firing off of this compile, that's kind of the high level module loading. This is the low level. So this is actually going to read in, or we read in our file, and now it's going to execute. Just clean up a shebang if there's one of those defining the language. Here's one of the coolest parts. So this require function we're defining here is going to be that require that you see up here. But it's actually got a little bit more than that. So I remember how I said these are synonymous. They are. But require actually has a ton of stuff attached to it. So you can resolve file names, which was originally a private function. We've just made it public to every module. This looks deprecated. Let's skip that. Attach a main property. You can even attach the extensions. If you see this comment, enable support to add extra extension types. So you can actually literally do cannot Bob's. And now you can load .bobs files as if they were JavaScript. Doesn't really do much. I don't know why you'd ever want to do that, but it's kind of crazy that this is the public extension library, you could say, and any module in your entire application can modify it. So you could just as easily do and now you can't compile JavaScript anymore, and you're dead. So let's not do that. So that's pretty cool. So let's get back into the JavaScript one. We fired off a compile event, right? Compile function. And we created this require method, or function, with a ton of methods and properties. We even attached a cache, so you can modify the cache. All this crazy stuff I'm talking about, not really normal for the normal module you're writing, but some really powerful testing modules. Does anyone use Rewire, Mockery, anything that kind of handles testing by taking control of the cache, does so by kind of modifying this pretty heavily. So it's dangerous, but both incredibly powerful. Let's see, this is a weird flag. We're going to skip over that. If anyone really wants to know what that does, I can talk to you later. But all of that is an optional thing that no one actually implements. First thing we're going to do now, we've set up our require function. We're going to create a wrapper around our module. Now, this is actually just an alias into an alias into Node.js itself, the actual file Node.js. If you scroll all the way down, that's actually just calling this method here. And what this method here does, and maybe this is the weird part, it ends up wrapping the actual file content that you've given it in these two strings. So let's actually show what that does. It's going to wrap the top, and it's going to wrap the bottom. this is pretty nuts. The first thing you'll notice is that's where we get all this stuff from. You basically wrap your entire module inside of one of these functions, and exports require a module, and then file name and dir name are all provided as arguments. So this is what's happening in every module you write. It's being executed within the scope. Pretty nuts. And so we compile it. Let's see. And then we call it. It's now popping back out of our stack. Let's go back to load. Where are you, load? This is passed without exception, false, and we return exports, and you're done. And so that's pretty much what's happening. The coolest kind of roundabout thing you can get into with this is you can require the module loading system via the module loading system, which is kind of weird inception and kind of crazy. But when I was talking about Mockery, I'm not going to say the third time. I was talking about Mockery. What it ends up doing is it overloads that load function I was talking about with its own version of that. It checks its own cache, overrides a bunch of stuff, etc. So you can really get into some super powerful stuff here without having to actually dig in and modify private functions. You can only get so far without doing that, but there's a ton of power in here, and it really kind of shows where all this stuff is coming from, what you're doing, and gives you an idea of how this all works behind the scenes. So yeah, that's pretty much everything I have to show you. If there are any questions, hopefully I didn't talk too quick. Yes?
How are the modules at the top of module.js loaded?
So good question. Let's see. If you go in here, I think this had its own. That's actually a really good question. I think this is the first thing that gets loaded. Oh yeah, that's a great point. Okay, I know why. So maybe not. These are all native modules, so I think it has something to do with it. And I actually haven't explored this. That kind of code path I breezed over. Where is it? If it's a native module, it gets its own special thing, and this is all kept in Node.js. So I believe, and I don't know this for sure, someone please correct me, it's all handled within Node.js for anything internal. And then once you start loading up external modules, you really need the kind of meat of this module. That's a good question. I don't really know the full answer on that. Cool. Anything else? Yeah, so I totally recommend kind of digging into Node core. I've learned a ton, and this was a great way to start. So, yeah.
Why did you end up wanting to know all this?
So, great question. God, I always do that. So we use Mockery at Box, and one of the weird kind of things we were looking at was that there was this kind of blurring of the cache. So if anyone uses it, it doesn't give you too much help in terms of when you need to deregister, when you need to disable, and it all kind of blurs together. And so what can happen is that you can kind of end your test, run into the next test, and it's using the old cache that you've kind of modified heavily. And so in kind of chasing down some bugs there, I kind of just got sucked into this rabbit hole. But it's crazy. So if you've ever wanted, most of your testing things are doing something like this. And it's good to understand why. Okay. Cool. All right, thanks guys.